The Elves all awakened at Cuiviénen. The Elves were the firstborn of the children of Ilúvatar, the first sentient race to awaken in Middle-earth. Their awakening took place at Cuiviénen, a bay on the eastern shores of the inland sea of Helcar, long before the rise of the sun and moon. There, under the starlight of Varda's first creations, the Elves opened their eyes and began their history. At this time, they were known simply as the Quendi, meaning those who speak, distinguishing themselves from the mute world around them. The Elves were immortal, immune to disease and aging, and bound to the fate of Arda itself. They could be slain or die of grief, but their spirits were bound to the world until its end. Soon after their awakening, the Valar, the godlike powers who shaped the world, discovered them. Melkor, the fallen Valar, also became aware of the Elves and sought to corrupt or destroy them. Fearing for their safety, the Valar waged war against Melkor, captured him, and invited the Elves to dwell in the west, in the land of Aman, where the light of the two trees shone undimmed. The Elves who accepted this invitation began a great journey westward across Middle-earth, and these became known as the Eldar, meaning people of the stars. Those who refused became known as the Avari, the Unwilling. Eldar, those who accepted the journey to Valinor. The Eldar were divided into three main kindreds, each named after their leaders and defined by distinct qualities and destinies. These were the Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri. Not all completed the journey to Valinor. Those who stopped along the way became new subgroups with unique cultures and histories. Vanyar, the Fair Elves. The Vanyar were the first and smallest of the three clans of the Eldar. They were led by Ingwe, who became High King of all the Elves and dwelt in Valinor as the chief of his people. The Vanyar were considered the fairest and most noble of the Elves, both in beauty and in spirit. Their hair was typically golden, their demeanor serene, and their devotion to the Valar absolute. Unlike other elven kindreds, the Vanyar never returned to Middle-earth after reaching Aman. They lived closest to the Valar, particularly under the guidance of Manwë and Varda, and were said to have sung often in their presence. They preferred contemplation, poetry, and worship over crafts or warfare. Because of this, little is recorded of them in the later histories of Middle-earth. They did not take part in the wars against Morgoth or Sauron, remaining instead in the Blessed Realm. Noldor, the Deep Elves. The Noldor were the second clan of the Eldar, led by Finwë. They were known as the Deep Elves for their pursuit of knowledge, craftsmanship, and skill in arts and lore. The Noldor were intellectually curious and driven to master the physical and spiritual aspects of creation. They were taught by Aule, the Valar of craftsmanship, from whom they learned metalwork, gemcraft, and smithing to near-divine levels of mastery. The Noldor's talents made them proud, and that pride was ultimately their downfall. Among them rose Feanor, Finwë's greatest son, who created the Silmarils, three radiant jewels that captured the light of the two trees of Valinor. When Melkor, now called Morgoth, stole the Silmarils and fled to Middle-earth, Feanor swore a terrible oath to recover them at any cost. This led to the flight of the Noldor, when many of the Noldor rebelled against the Valar, slew their own kin, the Teleri of Alqualondë, and returned to Middle-earth in pursuit of Morgoth. In Middle-earth, the Noldor established mighty kingdoms, Gondolin, Nargothrond, and Himlad, among others. They were great builders and warriors, responsible for much of the high culture and power of the First Age. Figures like Galadriel, Fingolfin, and Celebrimbor were all of Noldorin descent. Over time, they became deeply entangled in the wars against Morgoth, suffered immense losses, and many perished in the ruin of Beleriand. Yet their legacy endured through their descendants and their works, including the creation of the three rings of power by Celebrimbor in the Second Age. Teleri, the Sea Elves. The Teleri were the largest of the three clans of the Eldar and the last to begin the great journey. They were led first by Elwë and Olwë, brothers who divided leadership as the Teleri spread across the lands. The Teleri loved water and music, and they were known for their patient and gentle nature. Many among them were skilled in song, and their voices were said to be the most beautiful of all elves. As they journeyed westward, the Teleri were slow to move and often lingered, fascinated by the rivers, forests, and shores of Middle-earth. Because of this, many were left behind when the Valar transported the Eldar to Aman. This hesitation gave rise to several subgroups, the Falmari, the Sindar, and the Nandor. Falmari, Sea Elves of Alqualondë. The Falmari were the Teleri who successfully reached Aman. Led by Olwe, they settled on the shores of Eldamar, where they founded Alqualondë, the haven of the swans. The Falmari became renowned shipwrights and mariners, constructing elegant white ships with swan-like prows. They loved the sea above all else, and maintained a close friendship with the Maya Ose, who taught them the ways of the waves. Despite their gentleness, tragedy struck the Falmari during the rebellion of the Noldor. When Feanor demanded their ships to pursue Morgoth, the Teleri refused. In rage, the Noldor attacked and slew many of them in what became known as the First Kinslaying. The white shores of Alqualondë were stained with the blood of elves, marking one of the darkest acts in Elven history. After this, the Falmari turned away from the Noldor, mourning their dead and avoiding further conflict. Sindar, Grey Elves of Beleriand. The Sindar, or Grey Elves, were Teleri who never reached Aman because their lord Elwë, later called Thingol, became lost in the forests of Beleriand. Enchanted by the Maya Melian, he remained there with her, and together they ruled the hidden realm of Doriath. The Sindar took this as a sign to settle in Middle-earth permanently. Though they never saw the light of the two trees, the Sindar were nonetheless elevated by Melian's wisdom and power, becoming the most advanced of the elves in Middle-earth. They crafted fine garments, weapons, and songs, and under Thingol's rule, Doriath became a place of unmatched beauty and secrecy. The Sindar were more reserved and less radiant than the Elves of Valinor, which is why they were called Grey. When the Noldor returned to Middle-earth, relations between the two groups were uneasy due to the kinslaying, though alliances were later formed. The Sindar's most famous descendants include Thranduil and Legolas of later ages, as they preserved Sindarin traditions even as time and war changed the world. Nandor, Wood Elves/Green Elves. The Nandor were a branch of the Teleri who refused to cross the misty mountains during the Great Journey. Led by Lenwi, they turned southward and chose to live in the wide forested valleys along the river Anduin. They were a simpler people, preferring forests and rivers to the open sea. Their language and customs remained more rustic than those of their kin who continued west. Eventually, some of the Nandor migrated into Beleriand, where they became known as the Laiquendi, or Green Elves. Others would later populate Lothlórien and Mirkwood, forming the basis of the Silvan Elven culture. Laiquendi, Green Elves of Ossiriand. The Laiquendi were Nandor who settled in Ossiriand, the land of 7 rivers, in eastern Beleriand. They were the only elves of Beleriand who wore green garments and lived in harmony with the forests, blending seamlessly into their surroundings. Unlike the Noldor or Sindar, the Laiquendi avoided large cities and fortifications. They were skilled in woodcraft and archery, favoring stealth over direct confrontation. When the Noldor arrived, the Laiquendi accepted them peacefully, though they kept mostly to themselves. They later fought valiantly during the wars against Morgoth, but were nearly destroyed in the ruin of Beleriand. Their remnants merged with other elven peoples in later ages. Silvan Elves, Mirkwood, and Lothlórien Elves. The Silvan Elves descended mainly from the Nandor who had remained east of the Misty Mountains. Over time, their culture developed independently, centered around deep connection with forests, rivers, and nature. They lived in what became known as Greenwood the Great, later called Mirkwood, and in Lothlórien. The Silvan Elves were less concerned with grandeur or lore than the Noldor and Sindar. Their speech evolved into simpler dialects, and their societies were ruled by local leaders until Sindarin princes arrived to guide them. Orifer, a Sindar noble, became king of Mirkwood, succeeded later by his son Thranduil. In Lothlórien, the Silvan Elves were ruled by Galadriel and Celeborn, blending Nandrin and Noldorin traditions into a unique culture. The Silvan Elves were lighter of spirit, but capable of great courage, as seen when they fought in the Battle of the Last Alliance against Sauron. Avari, the Unwilling, those who refused the journey. The Avari were the elves who refused the summons of the Vala entirely, choosing to remain in Middle-earth when the others departed. Their name means the Unwilling. They distrusted the Vala's call, believing it to be a trap, or fearing to abandon their new world. The Avari stayed near Cuiviénen and later spread widely across Middle-earth. Because they never saw the light of Aman, the Avari did not share the same enlightenment or beauty as the Eldar, though they retained all the immortal qualities of the elves. Their languages and customs diverged greatly over time, fragmenting into many small tribes. Few records of them remain because they lived far from the centers of recorded elven history. Some scholars believe that the Avari intermingled with men or became reclusive forest dwellers, surviving into the later ages as hidden peoples. Their tales are largely lost, but they represent the most mysterious and independent strain of elvish identity, those who chose freedom in Middle-earth over eternal light in Valinor. Rivendell, Imladris, mostly Noldor under Elrond. Rivendell, or Imladris, was founded in the Second Age by Elrond half-Elven, a descendant of both the Noldor and the Sindar. It became a refuge for all elves and friendly peoples, especially after the destruction of Eregion by Sauron. The core population of Rivendell consisted mainly of Noldorian elves, though it welcomed individuals from many lineages. Elrond's wisdom, inherited from his lineage of Eärendil, Idril, and Luthien, made Rivendell a center of lore and healing. The Elves of Rivendell were deeply involved in the preservation of ancient knowledge, the safekeeping of the Ring of Air, Vilya, and the resistance against Sauron. Their culture reflected the high traditions of the Noldor, mastery of language, music, and craft, but tempered by humility and memory of loss. Lothlórien, Nandor/Silvan, ruled by Galadriel, Noldor. Lothlórien was one of the last great elven realms in Middle-earth. Its people were primarily Silvan elves of Nandarin descent, but their culture and governance were profoundly influenced by Galadriel, a Noldorin princess, and her husband Celeborn, of Sindarin lineage. The elves of Lothlórien lived in harmony with the golden malon trees, building their homes high in the branches. Under Galadriel's power, the realm was protected by the Ring of Water, Nenya, which preserved its beauty and kept decay at bay. The blending of Silvan simplicity and Noldorin wisdom gave Lothlórien a timeless, dreamlike quality. It was both a refuge and a remnant of the lost bliss of Aman. The people of Lothlórien maintained strong traditions of secrecy and defense, especially after the rise of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. Though reclusive, they played a vital role in the War of the Ring, aiding the Fellowship and later cleansing southern Mirkwood of Sauron's forces. Mirkwood, Woodland Realm, Silvan elves ruled by Sindarin King Thranduil. The Woodland Realm in Mirkwood was the largest remaining elven kingdom in the Third Age. Its people were chiefly Silvan elves, rustic and forest-dwelling, ruled by King Thranduil, a Sindar noble who had migrated east after the fall of Doriath. The Silvan elves of Mirkwood were cautious and secretive, shaped by centuries of living under the shadow of Dol Guldur and the spreading darkness in the forest. They constructed underground halls inspired by Doriath's Menegroth, carved into the hills and lit by lanterns of soft green light. Though less learned in high lore than their Noldorin kin, they were formidable archers and hunters. Under Thranduil, Mirkwood maintained its independence and resisted the encroachments of Sauron's power. Legolas, Thranduil's son, would later join the Fellowship of the Ring, symbolizing the enduring link between the ancient elves of the First Age and the fading world of the Third. The elves shaped the very soul of Middle-earth, from the first songs beneath the stars to the final ship sailing west. Their beauty, wisdom, and tragedy define the rise and fall of ages. If you want to dive deeper into their hidden histories, legendary battles, and the fading of their light, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, because the next story will take you even further into the heart of Tolkien's world.